his true colors there. Did I mention you can say gay here? Thank you. A year before he was brutally assassinated, Harvey Milk made a recording he said was only to be listened to in the event of his death by assassination. Now let's think about that for a moment. How many of us have felt the need to leave a notice in case of our death by assassination? How many of us have ever stood on the front lines of change in such a profound way? I don't bring this up to shame us, only to invite us to pause as we ask the question, how do we show up in support of creating the world we want to live in? Last October, I was visiting my mother on National Coming Out Day weekend. Unfortunately, that means I missed the lovely service we had here at Emerson, led by the Reverend Paul Turner, but instead, I was given a different opportunity as I accompanied my mother to her church that Sunday morning. Let's just say it was not a Unitarian Universalist congregation. At some point, after the music and the normal Lutheran liturgy, the minister got up to speak and did not take long before his railing began. With great certainty and the prolonged matter-of-factness that only a Midwestern-born Lutheran can muster, he proclaimed loudly that homosexuality was a sin. Though he did not name National Coming Out Day, he did reference those that may be celebrating this, quote, sin with pride that weekend. He said both those that engaged in homosexual behavior and those that supported it were not following God's law. And of course, he used biblical references to justify his claims that a man should only be with a woman and a woman with a man. And he was obviously disturbed and perplexed as he declared shame on anyone who dared to see gender as anything other than a biological binary that was decreed by God, didn't we know? He spoke about the evils of a society that had slipped from what he called, quote, family values. Now, I had not been prepared for such an onslaught of hate and ignorance that morning, and finally, I could take it no longer. I stood up on the pew my mother and I occupied, and I raised my arms overhead, and in my best preacher voice, I told him in no uncertain terms to just stop. I said, stop because you are lying to your people. I told him, I declared that Jesus, the very Jesus of his religion, would not speak to people that way. I told him that Jesus would in fact tell him to stop because Jesus knew and understood that all humans are God's children and all are born into love. I told him to step down from his pulpit right then and there, and I stepped up front of that congregation. I took over the service, gave a rousing sermon on queer inclusivity. Everyone cheered. Multiple people came forward and asked to be freed of their sin of homo and transphobia. Several people came out of the closet right then and there. 2 men even kissed right in front of the pulpit. And then I blinked, and my daydream was over. And I found myself sitting firmly in the pew beside my mother, the preacher's voice droning on in the background. Who can relate, right? How many times in the face of oppression and injustice do we want to yell, stop? But instead we sit quietly frozen, not sure how or what to say or do, not sure where to find the bravery, even if we did know what to say. Oh, of course, the whole time I was sitting there, my mind was racing in debate about whether to stand up or stop him in his tracks or to remain stoically by my mother's side. I was aware that this was my mother's congregation and a place that she had come to and found community. And I was aware that there was a very good chance that if I did stand on that pew, that her welcome there would be changed forever. But surely I could have not been the only one to be disturbed by his message, I thought. In fact, as he continued to rant for what seemed like a very long time, I began to look around this room of about 80 people or so in the pews. Almost no one was actually nodding their heads in agreement. No one was standing or shouting amen or waving their fists to urge him on. But again, this was a Lutheran church, so to be fair, even the preacher's rant wasn't very ranty. By the way, I was baptized Lutheran, so I'm allowed to say these things about Lutherans. I know my people. But I am sure of those 80 people there were many minds turning as the minister spoke. I am sure that someone in that room was thinking of their gay son or daughter. Or perhaps they were thinking of that really great neighbor who had introduced themselves as non-binary. Or perhaps they were thinking of that high school friend who recently posted on Facebook that after many years of hiding, they had finally come out of the closet and feel free for the first time in their lives. Or perhaps there was one person in that room thinking of that grandchild who was lost to suicide after being the target of another's hate because of their gender. And perhaps there was at least one person in that crowd who had spent their life trying to fit into the preacher's box, all the while knowing that their true colors were waiting silently to emerge. I don't know which ones were thinking those things, but statistically, I knew there must be some. In 1853, the abolitionist Unitarian minister Theodore Parker said this. He said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. But I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends towards justice." It's a phrase that has been taken up by many after him, including Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and is one that, while inspiring, I find also depressing. How long of an arc? How long must the moral arc be for people to stop finding ways to marginalize others? How long must the theological arc be for religion to stop promoting a God that judges its own creations? Amen. Like, what is that? How did the teaching of Jesus is to love thy neighbor as thyself get an asterisk? There's a little asterisk. Except if your neighbors are gay or bi or trans or queer, then it's okay to hate them. My Bible didn't have an asterisk in it, but some preachers put it there. That asterisk lets it be okay to pass legislation designed to fortify those that would have some members of our society erased. If Jesus did live, and if many of the stories of his parables in the Gospels are true, then I do not think Jesus used an asterisk. I do not think he taught that some people stand outside of love. As Unitarian Universalists, we declare that there are no footnotes to our love. Amen. Amen. Love is love. Everyone is whole and holy and good. But we are not alone in the moral landscape, and we recognize that in our society, certain identities are centered and others are marginalized and declared as less whole. For those in power in Florida and coming soon to Georgia and other states, this declaration gets hidden within legislation. In Florida, a bill disguised as a parents' right bill signed by the governor has deeper intentions to further marginalize LGBTQ children and families. Part of the bill reads like this. It says, classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3 or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. Now, while the bill could read as some common sense from the perspective of only teaching children age-appropriate material, the preamble of the bill gives us insight into the real intentions of the law. The bill's authors write in the preamble this, that their aim is to prohibit classroom discussion about sexual orientation and gender identity. Not just instruction, but conversation and discussion. The term classroom instruction in the actual bill is meant to mean eliminating books in the classrooms and libraries with LGBTQ characters or historical figures, something that has already begun to happen in Florida and in other states. And, quote, no classroom discussion is another level altogether and could very well mean that teachers have the authority to not let a student with gay parents talk about those families. Think about that. There are stories already coming out of students getting in trouble for doing just that, saying things like, my dad's. I'm sorry, you can't say that. Imagine that. Imagine a child who never in a book sees any family that represents their family. By the way, the bill also allows parents to sue a school district if a teacher or staff member discusses sexual orientation or gender identity in a way that is age inappropriate in elementary schools. My mom's preacher Shirley would say that these discussions are age inappropriate at any age, except to condemn them. So is that going to count? Can a teacher decide what is age inappropriate and decide that anybody under 99 cannot have these discussions? So what are we to do? Well, of course, we must do what we can to stop these bills, like the one in Florida, from passing in Georgia or anywhere else in the country. And I implore you, if you feel called to do that, to work on that legislation. And I also believe there is something more that each of us can do right now. Every once in a while, I hear someone try to describe Unitarian Universalism by saying, you can believe anything you want there. But that's actually not true. I want to be really clear about that. We will do our best to love you, no matter what you believe. And we have wide arms for all kinds of theological and cosmological understandings of the universe and purpose in it. But make no mistake, Unitarian Universalism is a faith that has strong beliefs. We believe that every person, every gender, every sexual orientation is whole and holy. And to be you, we understand that those identities that are centered in society must make a particular effort to de-center themselves from places of privilege so that those on the margins have space to come in. Did you follow that? We understand that those identities that are centered in this society must make a particular effort to de-center themselves. Many people in the dominant community don't get this aspect of our faith. They think that when we say Black lives matter, that we are saying white lives don't matter. That if we lift up the LGBTQ community and celebrate Pride Month, we're saying that you should feel bad or shameful for being straight or cisgendered. But here's the thing. Straight people don't need a straight Pride Month. They already have 12 of those. Right? And white folk don't need signs that say White Lives Matter. Those banners and flags are already flying all over the place. De-centering whiteness or straightness isn't erasing it. It's saying, hey dudes, you're not the only ones. Right? Stop clogging up the middle. Because it's a bottleneck for everyone. Sadly, society forgets that we are all part of humanity and that it is in making room for everyone that we all get stronger. Harvey Milk once said, it takes no compromise to give people their rights. It takes no money to respect the individual. It takes no political deal to give them freedom. It takes no survey to remove repression. Standing up on that pew that day may have been powerful, but more likely than not, it would have centered me and not the people who were being marginalized. The focus would have been on the loud, straight woman in the room. The focus would have been on my emotions and my discomfort. Now, not that there's anything wrong with, because there is a time and place for interrupting oppression. There definitely is. But we also need to make sure that we are not doing more harm than good when we do that. So one way we do this is develop our allyship abilities. So I want to talk about allyship for a moment. One of my favorite definitions of allyship is this: allyship is an active, consistent, and arduous practice of unlearning and reevaluating, in which a person holding systemic power seeks to end oppression in solidarity with a group of people who are systemically disempowered. The part I like about that best is this idea that it's a practice. It's not so much, hey, I'm an ally, look at me, I'm a white straight ally, woo! Can you guys all notice me, how good I am? I'm a really good person. That's not allying, right? It's a consistent, arduous, active practice. So I'd like to share these 7 tips that I found once about practicing allyship with our LGBTQ community that I thought were very, very well taken, and ones that I keep at my side to remind myself to practice. As you listen to the list, I'm going to ask you to take note of which ones you may need a little bit more practice with or focus on. And we actually have copies of these at the back of the room at the end, so I'm going to invite you to take one of those home as well. So the first thing on the list is to be open, to learn, listen, and educate yourself. Sounds easy enough. Part of being a support to your LGBTQ family and friends and loved ones means developing a true understanding of how the world views and treats them. It sounds obvious, but to learn, you need to be willing and open to truly listen. Listen to your friends' personal stories and ask questions respectfully. And take it upon yourself to learn. Just because you have one gay friend doesn't mean they need to answer for you everything about gayness, right? The internet can do that for you. 2, check your privilege, okay? Most of us, including those within the LGBTQ plus community, have some type of privilege, whether it's racial privilege or class or education, being cisgendered, able-bodied, straight. Being privileged doesn't mean that you have not had your fair share of struggles. Does everybody understand that? I wish we had a different word, but the word privilege is the word we use. But so often it's translated by white people as being like, but wait, I've worked hard too. I came from a family that wasn't rich. I worked my way up. I don't have privilege. But it just means that there are some things you won't ever have to think or worry about just because of the way you were born, right? And that works whether you're white or whether you're straight. There's some things in life that when you navigate through them, you don't think twice about because of those things. That's what it means to be privileged. Understanding your own privileges in this society can help you empathize with marginalized or repressed groups. So I invite you to go home and kind of make a list. What are all the ways that within society my identity is privileged? Meaning the doors open automatically for this particular identity. Right? Number 3, don't assume. Don't assume that all of your friends, coworkers, or even housemates are straight. Don't assume someone's gender or pronouns. LGBTQ people don't all look alike in a particular way. And someone's current or previous partners don't define their sexuality. There are bisexual, pansexual, and queer people. All right? Number 4, think of ally as an action rather than a label. Right? Like we said, it's easy to call yourself an ally, but the label alone isn't enough. Number 5, confront your own prejudices and unconscious bias. Does anybody have any of those? Does anybody not? Being an ally means you will often find that you need to challenge any bias, stereotypes, and assumptions you didn't realize you had. So just notice the jokes you make, the pronouns you use, and if you wrongly assume someone's partner is of a particular sex, right? You meet a woman and you say, oh, are you married? Tell me about your husband, right? 6, know that language matters. We form human connection through language. So the majority of us respect someone if they say, hey, I changed my nickname, call me Deborah now instead of Debbie, right? Or if someone's formal name is Catherine, but they want to be called Kathy. We respect that. Accommodating LGBTQ plus people's names and pronouns are no different. If you are unsure of someone's pronouns or label, just ask them respectfully. When meeting new people, and I think this is an important practice to practice with yourself, when meeting new people, try integrating inclusive language into your regular conversation using gender-neutral terms. What's your partner doing today, right? Before you assume who that partner may be. And keep an eye on your own unintentional offensive language that you may accidentally use every day. And number 7, know that you will mess up. It happens. Just breathe, relax, we're all gonna get through this. It's gonna be fine. Apologize if an apology is needed and appropriate, and then commit yourself to making the shifts. Go back to your values. Remind yourself, what do I value? It is a simple but powerful list, one I hope you will consider to work with. My friends, we don't all have to be the Harvey Milks of the world. It may not be right for anyone or even most of us to take such a front-facing seat in the fight against any oppression. But I do believe that to live our Unitarian Universalist values and commit ourselves to those values, we must practice allyship wherever we find marginalized identities, and that list can work for many identities. I believe that together we will build a strong world, and we can truly change that world, I think, a little bit at a time as we practice that and practice that and practice that.